Maybe I should give it to her first.
All right. Hi, interwebs.
It's so funny not being able to see who's watching.
Makes it anonymous. We got some folks tuning in.
Sweet.
Hi, friends. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in a moment. Please share out your view. Throw it up to other people. We're so excited that you're here. All right. And I think with that, all right. Hi, folks. Thank you for joining us in the Vermont Wild Kitchen.
Usually this time of year, we would be doing cooking seminars like this live.
The ramps come up during the springtime, and you can find them under deciduous trees, and they really like that full sunlight in the spring when the leaves aren't out.
This is a rear shank, so it came off one of the rear legs. Down here would be the bone that goes to the hoof, and then up here the rest of the leg.
This is my favorite part of any fish, is the cheek. It is just tender, sweet, succulent. It's the best bite. I'll take that over a loin, a belly, a tail any day. And there's a shame there's only two of them and they're so small in a fish.
Here's an example. There is this really beautiful brick red mushroom with this really gorgeous gloss and white all along the edge.
What we're really trying to do here is just bring you into our kitchens and show you just how easy and just how delicious it can be to not only cook with wild ingredients, but also pair those up with the farm fresh ingredients that can be found throughout Vermont.
Oh. All right. Hi, folks. Welcome to the Vermont Wild Kitchen. We are very excited to have you here today. The Vermont Wild Kitchen is a collaboration between rural Vermont and Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and it's hosted by me, Shane Rogers. I am very excited for the show that we have prepared for you tonight. And ironically enough, we're also crashing the Vermont Farm to Plate's annual gathering. And we have some great guests on that are going to be demonstrating some wonderful wild food and cultivated food, hors d'oeuvres and cocktails. And so it's a big welcome and a big hello to all our new guests. And I would just have to say, you know, to our food systems folks who aren't already talking about wild food as part of their work, I would highly encourage you to reconsider, but also don't just talk about it. You want to be doing the actual work of developing these authentic relationships and committing to the funding of this type of work, because from food sovereignty to land access to everything in between, these two worlds are really grappling with the same issues. And they are the same ones that you're spending a couple of days with at the gathering. And they are things that we can all be working on together. So without further ado, I am very excited to have Sarah Danley, who is the Farm to Plate Network Manager, and Pete Bayliss, who is a chef and avid local forager. And they are going to be demonstrating some wild hors d'oeuvres and cocktails tonight. So Sarah and Pete, welcome to the Vermont Wild Kitchen. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you.
And we're going to be starting with Sarah, right? You have some fun drinks for us today.
Yeah, definitely. So I've got a bunch of drinks to go over. But first, fundamentally, I was going to say most of these drinks I've prepared to be really easy to throw together in the moment, because a lot of it's work that's been done earlier in the season, done a few days in advance. Really thinking about ways we can do batch cocktails and really quick cocktails, especially with the holiday season coming up. So I'm going to be showing a few recipes of how I would combine different things. But fundamentally, it's about combining however you would like ingredients, foraged ingredients, local ingredients that have been preserved or prepared in a variety of different ways, including drying, freezing, steeping them in liquor, steeping them in honey or syrup, vinegars. I've got a fun infused sugar to show you. So we'll be going through a bunch of those techniques and then kind of just throwing them together and playing around with them. And I'm actually going to start with the one that's going to take the longest on our show tonight, which is some mulled cider. So Pete and I live on a farm. We're tenants on a beautiful 100-acre farm, and there's a lot of really overgrown apple trees here. So every year we harvest a lot of these apples. A lot of them are feral. They're not necessarily good for eating, but they make really delicious fresh pressed cider. And every year we also ferment that hard cider. We usually don't use purchase yeast. We usually let it go wild with wild yeast, and that can lead to like really mixed results. Some years it's delicious and some years it's kind of awful. I am excited to say that this year's batch turned out pretty good. So instead of using fresh cider from the store, I'm going to be using some of the cider that we pressed ourselves and fermented. It's still cider. It hasn't really carbonated itself. So I'm going to use it just like we would use still fresh cider in the mulled cider, but instead of adding other liquor, this is where the hardness will come from. And I just want to do a quick shout out. I love using these milk jugs to ferment my cider with, because I find that the plastic tops have the right amount of tension to stay closed until that pressure gets just too much. And when another bottle might burst, which Shane might be familiar with, instead these tops pop off. So
yeah, that is true. You definitely don't want to be driving around with fermenting cider in your car in a growler and then have it explode at the Tunbridge Fair. Not that has happened to me, but
definitely not the night you were staying with us. So
no, not at all.
So to get this hard cider, this mulled hard cider started, I am just gonna measure out the cider into the pot. Pete doesn't usually measure it, but we usually end up with weird half-cup serving size bowls at the end, so I like measuring it in advance. I'm gonna do 4 cups.
That's why I'm not a baker. I don't really like to measure things.
I'm gonna do 4 cups in case you want more than one each at the end. So the cider itself is wild foraged, but I also really wanted to add in this other foraged ingredient, which is rose hips. There are so many wild roses growing all over the property. In fact, they grow around a lot of the apple trees and get in the way of us picking the apples. But I really like the flavor of rose hips. So I experimented with mulling rose hips in the cider, and I just really love the delicious, subtle, fruity flavor that it has. So
and when would you go about foraging the rose hips, Sarah? When are you looking to pick them?
Even at this time of year. So they get sweeter actually after the first few frosts. So I've just been foraging them in the past few weeks. Often when I take our dog on a walk, I'll bring a basket and pick them as I go. I will say, because the bushes are so thorny, I recommend not wearing loose clothing and going by yourself. Yesterday, on my lunch break, I went by myself and I got so stuck that for a moment I really thought I was going to have to abandon my scarf in the woods. It was quite embarrassing how long it took me to get free. So most of the ones on the property here are these little tiny ones. So I just pick whole clusters of them, and I am just gonna throw a bunch in. I started taking them off the stems, and I'll still take off the really big pieces of stem, but I found it doesn't really make all that much difference. Shane, have you ever cooked with rose hips before?
I have not, but I love the fact that they're so readily available all throughout Vermont. And also, you can look around not only your backyard, but it's just one of those things that you're running into on the farms around here too. So even if you can't and you don't have a wild apple orchard in your backyard, any of the type of cider coming from our wonderful folks growing apples is also a great way to do this recipe too.
Absolutely. So in addition to the rose hips, I really like cinnamon with cider. Obviously, it's a classic combination. So I do usually like putting a stick of cinnamon in there. I also, the other 2 ingredients that I'll put in, both of which Pete really introduced me, started us doing, is a little bit of vanilla. And just a couple peppercorns. It adds a nice little tiny spicy subtle kick.
Yeah, it's got a little bite. And also peppers have a really kind of floral characteristic to them that a lot of people don't appreciate because they typically just throw it on savory dishes a lot. But you can really get a lot of floral properties out of peppercorns if you toast them first and then steep them or just steep them straight up. You'll get a lot of those qualities. So.
Oh, that sounds absolutely wonderful. And your whole entire house is going to smell absolutely delicious once this gets on the stove, I imagine.
So if I didn't have rose hips, I might throw in orange slices or something else fruity too. But I really do like the flavor of the rose hips, so I want it to be really highlighted in this recipe. So Pete, if you could put
how long are you gonna put that on for, Sarah?
We'll probably just keep it simmering through the show. I'd say anywhere from like 20 minutes to 45 minutes. Really depends on your preference and how strong you want all of the other flavors to be that you've added in. And the last thing I was going to say about that quick recipe is I showed you most of the rose hips on the property are really tiny, but the other day I was walking somewhere I don't usually walk and found these giant ones. A lot of cultivated roses have really large rose hips, but usually not so much the wild ones. But here you can see the size of the mammoth ones I just found the other day. So while that mulls, I'm going to stick some of these giant ones on my skewers as a pretty garnish for the drink when it's finished.
Always adding that final flourish. That's awesome.
Exactly.
And for folks who are out exploring, it is rifle season, so this is just a friendly little reminder to always wear your blaze orange. There are very little gun accidents happening here in Vermont, but we always want to make sure that safety is first. So just keep that in mind as you're out looking for these rose hips and other fun wild edibles, even late in this season.
It was actually a bright orange scarf that I was wearing. That was the one that got stuck in the rose hip bush. So
see, it was the woods just didn't want you to return. I think that's what it comes down to.
Exactly. So yeah, that's
awesome.
Just the rest of the show, and I think now we're going to hand it over to Pete to start cooking.
All right.
Awesome, Pete. Tell us what you're going with.
Yeah, so actually before I get started, I just wanted to kind of a tip on overall, overall cooking, because I get a lot of questions on how do I make good food, how do I make things taste good, and so I just kind of wanted to explain kind of my approach when working with food I'm not familiar with or food that I want to elevate. So my biggest foundation cooking, or what I base my cooking on, is making sure that I hit every taste. So I'm gonna hit sweet, salty, umami, bitter, sour, and it's just a matter of kind of balancing all of those. And if you can hit every one of those tastes in one bite or an entire dish, you're going to find the diner or whoever's eating pretty satisfied, as long as you've kind of found a good balance. In addition to that, you should also keep in mind aromatics and texture. Aromatics are super, super important in cooking because they provide flavor. And you'll notice I said flavor, not taste, because flavor and taste are two completely different things. And flavor is basically like the essence of something. It's what makes a carrot taste like a carrot or an orange taste like an orange. And if you were to, a good example or a good demonstration of this concept is if you were to plug your nose and eat a carrot or an orange, you would only get either sweet, salty, bitter, sour, umami, but you wouldn't be able to, you would have a really hard time figuring out what you're tasting. And that's because 70 to 80% of flavor is actually smell. So when I'm trying to elevate a dish and kind of bring more properties and characteristics to it, I keep in mind adding aromatics. So things that are really fragrant and smelly, like onions, garlic, carrots, parsnips, herbs, all that sort of stuff, which is why onions, carrots, and garlic are and celery are often the base of soups and stews, because they're very aromatic and they add a lot of good stuff to the dish. And then the last one is texture. It's just not just adding one more sensory experience to the whole thing. And if you can bring every sensory experience in at once, you're going to have a really good dish. And so I kind of, when I'm adjusting a soup, if I've messed up, I go through the taste and I go through the aromatics and I go through the taste and the aromatics, and then I also think about texture, because texture is really, really important. You want to have good contrast when you're eating, because that's also kind of pleasurable when you're eating. So with all that said, I'm going to start on the rillettes.
It does sound like you eat very well at your house. So, and I will say, I think for folks that maybe are hearing this and are like, I have no clue, this is all stuff you can find in your pantry. It's all stuff that is at the grocery store, and it's all stuff you can find in the woods too. So as you play around, like, don't be intimidated. It's a trial and error.
Yes. So with the venison, I took the approach of wanting to kind of bring a really rich, meaty kind of flavor to the dish. So that's why I picked rillettes. And rillettes is a classic French preparation. It's kind of like a lot of dishes that derive out of necessity in terms of like preserving meat before refrigerators. So people back then would cure meat and then slow cook it in oil for a couple hours, or some sort of fat. And then they would shred the meat up and then cover it with fat, and then it would hold for like 5 or 6 months unrefrigerated. And that's kind of where this dish derived from. So the first thing is I have some venison. I obviously couldn't do it on the show because it would take way too long, but I cured the venison with just a little bit of salt. And this cut was just like some basic meat. And you can see it's basically completely submerged in, I used beef tallow for flavor. I'm going to basically make like a meat paste, or like an emulsion, and kind of whip it together. I'm going to pull the meat out, and I'm going to bring this up here.
So we slow cook the venison in the tallow overnight in a crock pot.
Yes.
How many hours was that in the crock pot for?
What's that?
How many hours was that in the crock pot for?
Probably about 4 hours.
Yeah, so it wasn't in the evening. Yeah.
Eat something easy to put on the counter when you go to work, and you can come back to your house smelling like beef tallow and venison. What type of cut for the venison did you use, Pete?
What's that?
What type of cut for the venison were you using?
We actually, speaking of how you get these ingredients, we actually got this venison from you, Shane. I don't know if you even remember. We bartered you a few pounds of pork for a few pounds of venison, and then the package wasn't even labeled. It just it's meat from Shane, and we knew it was venison. So in terms of how to get it, bartering can definitely be a way to get these cuts if you're not a hunter or a fisher or forger yourself. And I would defer back to you on what type of cut that was, Shane.
Yeah, I did. That was like a year and a half ago. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point too, Sarah. Like, if you are just new to wild game and you're not sure, or you just haven't grown up hunting or fishing, I consider myself an adult onset hunter, for instance. And the best way is just to start asking your friends and family. We all know that food is best shared with the people that you love. So I can only imagine that there are going to be people in your life that are going to want to trade you for some of the yummy things you're growing in your garden or you are raising yourself too. What are you doing there, Pete?
So I'm basically shredding and pulling the meat, and then gradually whisking in or mixing in the beef tallow to kind of give it a like a paste, sort of pate sort of consistency. There's actually also a little red wine, carrot, onion, and thyme in with the confit as well. I'm
really excited to finally get to try this because I had to live with the smell of it slow cooking for 4 hours several days ago and haven't gotten to eat any of it yet. So if I'm hovering and patiently waiting, that's why.
I definitely think that's the worst part about hosting the show is I'm usually on this side of the screen, and I probably say this every episode, but I watch you all make these delicious dishes and then have to sign off and not be able to experience them. So I am very jealous, to say the least.
So I've basically got a nice little paste here. I know pasting meat kind of sounds gross, but I promise this is delicious. It's super rich, meaty. And now I'm going to, this is where I kind of took into account what I started off with, trying to balance the dish. So we have some foraged mushrooms here, and I used a blend of mushrooms, about 4 different types, because they're all very similar in flavor, and they're all nutty and umami and meaty. So we have the common names: hedgehog mushroom, chanterelle, the yellowfoot chanterelle, and butterball mushroom. And I just basically, I wish I had some fresh ones, but mushroom season just kind of ended, so I had to use some of the ones that I had previously preserved by sauteing up and freezing. So
we have a chest freezer that's mostly full of mushrooms.
That's the best part about preserving the wild food that you find. You get to enjoy it later.
The freezer is bursting right now, and so's the shelves with the dried mushrooms. So this is going to add umami, nuttiness, and richness. And then I also have some onions. That's an aromatic, so that's going to add another layer of flavor. And then I also have some whole grain mustard. I picked whole grain mustard because of the texture. Getting little pops of the grains in there is really, really nice. And it's also provides a little bitterness and sourness as well. And then I have some fresh thyme. And then for sweetness to the mix, I've got little maple syrup, because you gotta have maple syrup. Obviously.
It would be sacrilege if you added sweetness that wasn't maple syrup. So I'm glad that's on this episode.
And then I got a little white wine vinegar here as well to add another level of sourness. And the reason why I'm using like a couple sour items is because the venison, the rillettes, is going to be super, super fatty and rich, and you really need something to kind of cut through that. So I'm going to use the sweetness and the sourness, and then the other things are just going to kind of bring out the aromatics and just kind of really bring the whole dish together. And then we're going to serve it on a nice crunchy piece of bread, which is going to be the texture part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my pan hot.
I was understandably corrected that also Vermont honey would have worked too for your sweetness. So
I have some really late in the cocktail, so we're all good on that front too.
Oh, perfect. And folks, I mean, listening to Pete, like, he clearly knows his stuff. But again, these are all things that you're finding in your freezer, they're finding in your pantry, and you're trading with your friends. So if you're interested, I would definitely just start poking around and seeing what you can make up for yourself and seeing what you can find, because there really is nothing better than just a home cooked meal, as we all know.
It's great living with Pete and getting all the delicious food from someone who knows what he's doing, but we do make a lot of experimental dishes, and some work out better than others. So
yeah, my partner definitely knows about that too.
All right, so I'm going to start off with onions. I'm just going to throw those in the pan and sweat them out a bit, just to kind of get the raw onion harshness out. And then I'll add in the mushrooms. Yeah, this year was a fantastic year for mushrooms. I don't know how you did, Shane, but I made out really well this year.
Yeah, it was definitely a banner year. And, you know, folks, again, just getting out into the woods and finding that food that's just readily available to you as well. And, you know, while you're cooking that up, Pete, I think I want to mention, you know, Vermont Fish and Wildlife too just launched a Venison for Vermonters program. So, you know, while we're talking about sharing our meat with each other, there are programs out there that are making sure that folks who are experiencing food insecurity or just in need of, you know, some type of protein over the winter, that those different types of venison, whether they're donated or, you know, killed with our addiction to cars, are getting into the hands of folks who need it best. So if you are interested, I would definitely check that out and make sure that you know what's going on with that, because it's a very cool program. It looks like you have that on like medium high to high heat, and you're just kind of getting a nice toast on that, Pete.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a little color on the mushrooms. If you can get color on your mushrooms, it's gonna really improve the flavor.
Yeah.
And it smells really fragrant right now. So.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you can.
That's wonderful.
One of the mushrooms he mentioned he's using is hedgehogs, which is absolutely my favorite wild mushroom.
That sounds absolutely delicious.
Yeah, I found the biggest patch of hedgehogs this year, and it just kept giving and giving. So it was pretty awesome.
And I think one of the coolest things about, all of this wonderful food that you're all cooking up is that it really is combined with all the wonderful cultivated food too here in Vermont. So like these two worlds, like I was saying in the beginning, they just go hand in hand together. And it's about being able to raise your own meat and feed yourself and your community while also connecting with this wonderful working landscape that we all know and love and want to protect. So, for folks that are tuning in, whether you have been hunting your whole life, whether you've been farming your whole life, and maybe haven't thought about the other side of that, I would definitely encourage you to continue looking into it. This work is super important, and it's going to take all of us to make sure that beautiful Vermont stays beautiful, and that everybody has enough food to eat too.
Yeah, I think another fun example of how these are all related is that pork that I mentioned earlier that we bartered to you for this venison is because we had, with our neighbors, we purchased a whole pig from Howling Wolf Farm. So the four of us purchased a whole pig, so Pete and I were slated to get half of it, but even half a pig is a lot of pork, especially because we don't eat a ton of meat. So, part of why we were excited to get that half a pig was because we knew we could also barter it to people like Shane for meat that we wouldn't otherwise be getting, like venison. So it's really all connected.
Yeah, and it all builds community, which is something that we all desperately need more of, I think, in our lives.
Yeah, I really wish you could smell this because it's just.
Now you're just rubbing it in.
Yeah, it's super, super nutty.
He does this to me too. He makes delicious food at work and sends me pictures about it and tells me how delicious it is.
Yeah.
I did some vinegar and I reduced it down a little bit, just so there isn't too much liquid in my mix here. Now I'm just gonna add a little mustard, probably about a tablespoon. And then I'm gonna finish with just like maybe a teaspoon or a half teaspoon of maple syrup, just enough to get that little bit of sweetness in there. And then finish it with thyme, and then I'll throw together the finished product. So
wonderful. While he's finishing up, Sarah, did you maybe want to demonstrate your next cocktail?
Yeah, definitely. So next, I'm actually going to show two cocktails because they're both really simple. Just like pouring together in whatever ratio you want. Some stuff that I already have pre-prepared. So the first one I'm going to share is a whiskey sour, except the sour part of it comes from a syrup that I made the other day with a blend of foraged wild ingredients. So we have a lot of high bush cranberries on the property along the river, and I've always been tempted to forage them, but they're a little bit bitter. Some individual trees more than others. But it occurred to me that in a cocktail, you're adding a little bit of bitterness anyway, usually. So what I did is I made a syrup that combines some foraged sumac, some staghorn sumac, which sumac is one of my favorite flavors.
And sumac, by the way, is everywhere. If you drive down the highway, you can see it on the side of the road. Any of you can go out and just grab some. So
I made this syrup the other day. I soaked the sumac branch in some water until it was as strongly flavored as I wanted. And then I lightly crushed some of those high bush cranberries into it. For those of you who aren't familiar with high bush cranberries, this is a branch that I took from the tree earlier today. They also hang on really late into the season. They're still out there. Like I said, they can be pretty bitter, so I don't really enjoy them by themselves, but it adds a nice bitter note to the syrup, which is really good for cocktails. And then after adding the sumac and the high bush cranberry, I decided I wanted a little bit more volume and a little bit more fruitiness. And earlier this season, I had also frozen some autumn olive, which is an invasive and it's everywhere. So I was harvesting autumn olives. Again, when I went on a walk with my dog, I would bring a container and pick some autumn olives. So I threw that in as well to this syrup. So really for this whiskey sour, I'm actually just going to do, I experimented a little bit with the ratio, and it ultimately comes down to personal preference. But for me, and for how sour and bitter the syrup ended up being, I'm just doing 1-to-1 the syrup and the whiskey. And that's really it. I mean, in a whiskey sour, you might add a little bit of simple syrup or maple syrup in my case. You might add some bitters, but I found that the syrup hits all three notes. It's got the fruitiness that you would do with the citrus, the sour. It has the bitter from the cranberries. And it has, and I actually did put a little bit of maple syrup into it when I was making it as well. So really that's what I did for that cocktail.
No, that sounds wonderful. And cocktails. And cocktails are one of those things.
Drink my first cocktail.
Yeah. Those are one of those things that are so easy to make too in your home. You have your favorite drink, and you can usually always make them into non-alcoholic as well, depending on what you're doing. That syrup, for instance, with some seltzer water would probably still be absolutely delicious.
Shane, you're stealing the punchline of my next cocktail.
Oh no.
So the other one I was going to share really quickly is I don't really have a good name for it. I basically refer to it as an herbal spritzer. So one of the other things I like doing is making, I don't know if they're technically shrubs, but you could probably call them a shrub. Basically herbs, dried herbs steeped in vinegar, in this case apple cider vinegar, and however much honey you want to taste. So one of my favorite herbal flavors, sorry, I've got so many bottles here. One of my favorite herbal flavors is lemon balm, and there's a ton of lemon balm growing wild here. So I happen to have already made this because I like drinking it just as a non-alcoholic, refreshing drink. I add a little bit of the syrup and some fresh soda water. You can also turn it into a cocktail by adding a little bit of alcohol of your choice. So I am going to pull together one of those. But before I do that, one of those other like general techniques I mentioned to prepare stuff in advance is preserving herbs by making like a flavored sugar. So this is a flavored sugar I made the other day. It's actually using pine needles and a little bit of lemon juice. So I just threw some pine needles, the sugar, and a little bit of lemon juice in my food processor. I admit my food processor is actually not very good. The knife probably needs to be sharpened. So it's a little bit, it's not
rustic.
Quite as fine as I would have liked, but it's okay. And the flavor is amazing.
You said it's rustic.
Exactly. And the flavor is really, really amazing. So I made this really to decorate the rim of the cocktail with, although you could also use it for lots of other things as well. So I'm going to just run this cocktail glass on the lemon, dip it in the syrup. See a fancy little sugared rim with a pine and lemon flavor in this case, but you could do it with any herbs, any flavors you wanted. And then pouring in a little bit of my lemon balm or whatever herb you want, oxymel, shrub, whatever you want to call it. You could do it without any liquor at all. Since this is happy hour and I like cocktails, I am going to put a little bit of gin in as well. I think that flavor goes really nicely with the lemon balm. But I think I'm going to keep it pretty light, so I'm not going to do a full shot of that, just a little bit.
You do have that other cocktail on standby too, just in case.
Exactly. And then add a little bit of seltzer water to taste.
Awesome. And we have Rob in the chat or in the comments saying that the best cocktail that he makes is 2 parts bourbon, 1 part maple syrup, and a dash of lemon juice. And he calls it the Ethan Allen. So you got to step up your cocktail naming game, Sarah. And clearly the Ethan Allen is already taken.
I am terrible at naming things, so I will take audience suggestions for any of these cocktails.
Wonderful. We can run a poll.
I'm not promising to actually use them, but I will take the suggestions.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Pete, it looks like you are getting ready with your rillette.
Yeah, so now it's basically, I'm just going to spread some of the rillette right on the little crostinis here. Sarah made some really nice ciabatta bread. You want to talk about how you made that?
Yeah, so that's actually, I'm definitely not an expert bread baker, but I do dabble in sourdough, and that is a sourdough ciabatta recipe from one of my favorite bakers, which is Brian Ford from, I have a cookbook of his called New World Sourdough. yeah, so basically that's his ciabatta recipe.
We just dropped that in the chat as well for folks who are interested. It looks absolutely delicious. It looks like a nice, like, kind of fancy pate, and I know you have all these other wonderful ingredients that you're about to start piling on.
Oh yeah.
So we got your mushrooms with the mustard and a little maple syrup and onions.
Little vinegar in there, white wine vinegar. Yeah. And this is honestly one of my favorite ways to eat mushrooms is just sauteed with a little vinegar and herbs and fat. It's the best way to eat mushrooms.
Yeah, I almost eat all my mushrooms just like with butter in a cast iron pan because I can't wait to just consume them. So I was happy that I even put up any this year.
I gotta say, I do really like, I'm with you guys on wanting to rush to eat them, but I think my favorite thing to do with mushrooms is risotto. So especially with some mushrooms, as he mentioned, he cooks and freezes, but chanterelles we usually dry in the dehydrator. And I love a nice super chanterelle risotto with, broth made from whatever last chicken roast or whatever we had. So good and worth the wait.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. So what's up next on our wonderful menu today?
Next we have barbecue bear sliders. So I kind of approached bear. I have to be honest, bear, I have very limited experience with bear, but from what I know, it's tends to be a little tougher and a little sweeter than regular beef. Shane, you probably know a little bit more than I do about that. I did try a bit, and I decided it would go really well with barbecue.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the direction I went.
That sounds awesome. And bear definitely is just one of those meats that's super unique. It has, like you said, that fruity flavor, but also wonderfully gamey, and just like a really rich, robust flavor that comes through with it. So I'm glad you're able to make some sliders, and it's similar preparation to ground beef or ground venison or whatever you have. Except I'm sure, did you cut some fat into the sliders before making it, Pete, or anything along those lines?
I actually didn't do fat. What I did was a little bit of our homemade fennel salt here. We have about, we usually have like 3 or 4 different types of homemade salts that we like to make. This one's kimchi salt. We make from the juices of our kimchi batch. We just take all the juice, put it with a bunch of salt, and then kind of lightly bake it. And then we just have a really good salt that goes really well in popcorn.
We eat a lot of it on popcorn.
I eat a lot of it on eggs as well. I love mushrooms, eggs, and kimchi salt. It's a really good snack. So
that sounds so good.
I'm gonna go ahead. I got my pot here hot. The reason why I did a little bowl pot thing here is because I'm gonna mark off the burgers and then add in a loose version of my barbecue sauce so that they kind of like baste a little bit and kind of get a little tender and juicy. And then I'll top it off with the thicker barbecue sauce right over the top. And with the approach with the barbecue sauce, it's very similar to what I was talking about earlier in terms of building flavors. So I made sure I was hitting every taste in there. I started off with onions and garlic and sweat that out. And then I followed up with some dried chilies that we had. When were those chilies from this year or last year?
Last year.
Okay, last year's dried chilies for a little heat and a little bitterness.
A little bit of mystery heat. Usually what I do is I grow a bunch of sweet peppers and hot peppers, and then I try to label them, and the labels get lost or rub off, and it's a mystery how hot they are.
Yeah, it's just like playing a little game. You never know what's going to be popping into your meals when you play with that. And Pete, you're just cooking that over high heat, medium heat?
Yeah, really, I'm just doing this to and initially get a bunch of color on it, and then I'm going to finish cooking it with a looser version of my my barbecue sauce. And then we'll go from there. I'm gonna cut
Awesome.
the burner for a second.
Yeah, that's fine.
And it's really important, I know, with bear too, just you're making sure that you're cooking it to the proper temperature. And there's tons of resources online about that as well. And we've had some bear cooked on this show too. So you could always look back at past episodes of the Vermont Wild Kitchen. I know one of my favorite meals I ever shared with folks was with you, Sarah and Pete and other friends. And we smoked a bear ham for something like 12 hours and just had a really wonderful dinner of soups and ham and other just concoctions at your house. And it was just such a lovely evening, pre-pandemic. And one of those things that I definitely miss dearly, being able to do so freely, because like I said, food definitely brings us all together.
Yeah, that was an amazing and really memorable meal. So
Yeah, well, I really like that because I feel like everybody brought different interests and strengths to the meal, but it was all homemade. It was all made with love and foraging, and it was just really cool just for all of us to get together and try out different things and try each other's homesteady kind of food. So
yeah, and I think one of the cool things too for tonight, well, Sarah, you and Pete both, you live on a farm, you help out the farmer who's raising sheep. I know you have like an orchard planted, you have a garden running, you got chickens. It's pretty much like one of the most Vermont-y things is when you think about Vermont that you two are living. And this is just how it's been. This is how folks have always sought their food out, living near and close to the land, including a lot of people who find themselves now, marginalized from some of these access to land. So it's just really important that we're keeping in mind, as we're talking about our food, as we're talking about wild foods, who has access and who doesn't, and making sure that everybody really is able to experience and to kind of live through this food that we're able to find here in Vermont. And I know the Farm to Plate Network does a lot of work with that, Rural Vermont and Vermont Fish and Wildlife as well. And there's a lot of great people that are really trying hard to make sure that food is more accessible and you're able to do it in a way that works best.
absolutely.
So now that I've got some good color on there, I'm going to add my barbecue sauce and kind of like combining multiple cooking methods.
You guys got a hi from Emily Bickford saying hello. And folks who are tuning in, please feel free to drop your favorite recipes, your suggestions. Rob, for instance, is telling us, when he trims beef brisket prior to smoking it, he'll save the fat and he adds that to his ground bear meat as like a nice way to get some of that fatty flavor in there. So people, drop what you're doing, what you're cooking. We would be happy to share that as well. And putting in the chat right now, Sarah, you had said that a lot of your recipes that you drew inspiration from for those cocktails came from a couple of books. One was Forage, Harvest, and Feast, The Drunken Botanist, and Drinking with Chickens, which obviously there's clearly a theme in your life for the type of books that you're reading, drawing inspiration from.
Yeah. Do you have another cocktail in there?
Yeah,
Okay.
should I work on my cocktail?
Or I can talk about what else I was going to put on the buns. This is going to be a few minutes.
I can do the last cocktail while that cooks, and then we can put the sliders together.
That sounds perfect.
So the last cocktail I was going to throw together is actually for tomorrow, because I think I have enough for tonight, to be completely honest. I am going to make a batch of sangria, and I love sangria. And I figured it would be a perfect use for all of the miscellaneous wild berries that I foraged and froze over the season. And also just like a really easy, nice batch cocktail. So really simple technique. What I have here, this is my bag of berries that I harvested this season and was frozen. I took them out earlier today to thaw. So this is some wild black raspberries and raspberries, and then some pink currants from my garden. So some years I get a big enough flush of berries that I freeze them all separately if I want to use them for something specific. But this year, for whatever reason, I was only getting like a little bit every day, so I didn't bother to keep them separate. I just threw them all in together. So I'm going to pour some of those in here.
There's really not much better than the nice sweet tartness of berries, whether they come from the wild bushes that you find or the farm down the road in the middle of winter as the days are getting longer. It's like a nice burst of sunlight in your in your 4 p.m. darkness.
I also just the other day found these wild grapes. I personally hadn't found wild grapes this late in the season before. I don't know if it's just been because it's been such a slow start to the winter, if they normally hang on. But I found these just the other day, again, while I was walking the dog, and just had it back with me in case I found anything. So I am going to throw those in as well. A lot of them are a little bit gone by since, again, it's really late in the season, but might as well put in a few that are still good. This is one of those feral apples, like the same ones that we picked for the cider. So this is one that we missed when we were picking for the cider pressing, and I, again, just found it just the other day. I've always liked adding chunks of apple into my sangria, so I picked it to throw in. I mean, really, this is, again, not so much a recipe, it's more just like a general technique for throwing a bunch of forage stuff together with alcohol. So
yeah, I love that you also called it a feral apple, which just is wonderful. And you know, while you're getting these together, again, we just got to give a big shout out to Rural Vermont for their collaboration on the Vermont Wild Kitchen. And you know, they just recently have gone through like a big process of updating their mission statement. So I just want to put that into the chat. So if folks are interested in learning more about what they're doing, definitely a great organization to be involved with, especially if you're looking to do some work at the intersection of equity and food systems here in Vermont. What did you just add in there, Sarah?
So that was the wine. I just picked up a full-bodied but not too sweet wine from my local co-op. I like wine. I'm not really good at talking about it, so I don't know any better way to describe it than that. I spent 10 minutes picking it out and called people to help me because I have my go-tos for plain drinking and I needed advice on what to get for sangria. So I added my berries and then a little bit of wine to this glass so that I can muddle it. I'm really only doing it in a separate glass because the jug that I'm going to let this sit in is not big enough to get my muddler in. So I'm just doing it with a little bit of wine in a separate glass. And then I'll pour that into the jug that I'll actually be sitting in.
And I love all of these recipes you all are demonstrating because most of them can be done ahead of time and they can sit out. They can sit in the pot. You can put them in the fridge and reheat them. And they really are just like a wonderful way to prep ahead. So like whether you have kids and you're on the run, but again, wild game is just one of those things. It's just as ubiquitous as chicken or ground beef and really is delicious as well.
So I think you all actually just got to witness my terrible pouring skills. Poured some of my wine on the counter. So I added the rest of the wine into this, and there are 2 other things I'm going to add to the sangria. Definitely not necessary, but I figured why not. The first is that I've always made sangria with a little bit of additional fruit liqueur added to it. And I happen to have this, which is a homemade Creme De Cassis, which is a black currant liqueur. So I grew black currants. You could easily do this with forage berries as well. But my way of preserving them this summer was to steep them in liquor and then strain it out and add a little bit of sweetener. In this case, I'm pretty sure I added maple syrup. So I'm going to use that as my additional fruit liqueur, my sangria. I'm going to throw in a little bit of that, not too much. And then the last thing I'm going to add, and this is something I actually haven't normally done, but I felt like experimenting a little bit. So this is honey that way back in the spring, I infused some foraged wildflowers in. So I infused lilac, clover, and violet into this honey, and then strained it out after a couple weeks, and it's been stored in my fridge since then. So, in a lot of sangria combinations, it might be too sweet to add honey into, but I did deliberately get a dry wine, and my Creme De Cassis is pretty sour, even though I added some maple. So I think it will be okay to add a little bit of sweetness in too, and I'm really excited to have the flavor of the flowers in there as well. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit of this honey into that sangria as well.
That's the best part about sangria. It is literally what you have in your fridge, in your kitchen. Anything that really tickles your fancy in the drink that you're trying to make is something good to add in the sangria.
Exactly. I mean, if it ends up being too sweet when it comes time to drink it, I can just add a little bit more of that Creme De Cassis to balance it back out again. So
exactly.
So that's really it. That's all I'm throwing in here. And then I'm going to let this sit overnight. And I will probably actually have this tomorrow evening to celebrate the end of the Farm Plate gathering. So
nice. Well, that is wonderful. And Pete, how are the burgers coming with the bear?
They're good. I just temped them. They're about like 145, 150. So we still got a little ways to go on that. But in the meantime, I'll talk about the toppings for the sliders. I kept it really simple. I did a little shaved vegetable kind of mix. I guess you could call it salad. It's Brussels sprouts, parsnips, and carrots, all local. And the reason why I did that is because parsnips and carrots, again, are really aromatic. And I also wanted to leave it raw so you get that nice crunch and kind of texture. And then in addition to that, we have local cheese, the Oma cheese from Jasper Hill Cellars. And I picked this because it's super creamy and it's got a little funk to it. And I just thought that would add another awesome element. It'll go really well with the barbecue sauce. Just it's nice and creamy, and the barbecue sauce is kind of bold and strong. So this will kind of help balance that out. And then Sarah also did the buns for these. They're little pretzel buns that we put ramp salt on. We foraged ramps earlier in the year, and we blended them with some salt. And we like to flavor a lot of things with salt. So
I definitely have. I have some of Sarah's salt in my fridge right now. The Fennel salt from I think a year ago. And it looks like you're pouring your mulled cider, Sarah, over your huge rose hips that you found.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I could have kept on for a little longer, but it was starting to. Our stove is actually really powerful too, so it was boiling a little bit faster than I might normally. We have a hard time simmering things on our stove. Let's just put it that way.
Our low setting is high. There's only one burner on here that is actually low. And so if you have multiple things that need gentle heat, it's really hard to cook.
So if it boiled away or steeped too strongly, I figured I would take it off and let it cool down a little bit to be ready for us to drink.
I am sure there are many people with all their tricks for their own stoves and their ovens about where to be cooking stuff on. Where's the hot spots and which ones that you can or can't use. So Pete, you're going to be adding the barbecue sauce to those sliders and letting that simmer. Like you said, you have the pretzel buns and the parsnips and the really delicious funky cheese. And like, obviously this takes like 10, 15 minutes to be able to cook up. And again, it's a really easy meal to be cooking up and a fun ingredient to be using, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I tried the most laborious part is making the barbecue sauce, but whenever I make barbecue sauce, I make a huge batch of it and then I throw it in the freezer and then I have it for the next 3 or 4 months or whatever. It freezes really well. And you can throw it on anything, anytime. So
awesome.
It's nice. Yeah.
Well, I think folks with that, we're going to let the bear cook. I know it's going to be absolutely delicious. We're coming up on like 55 minutes or so. I just want to say a huge thank you to Pete and Sarah. you all have obviously a very wonderful meal to be enjoying, and I saw Fran pop in on the comments saying that she's going to be enjoying it too. So I am very jealous and wish I could be joining you. And to everybody who's tuning in, again, thank you for your time this evening. This is the Vermont Wild Kitchen, and if you're looking for a way to engage with wild food, this is a great place to start. Share this out with your networks. Happens every third Thursday of the month. We are going live, and next month we're actually going to be joined for our quarterly, the Vermont Wild Kitchen presents the Dawnland Kitchen with Missisquoi Abenaki chef Jesse Lawyer. He's going to be cooking up something good, and I think bringing on a guest as well. So as always, folks, as you are going through your month, feel free to share your recipes, your pictures. You can use the hashtag Vermont Wild Kitchen on Instagram, Twitter, what have you. And we are looking forward to having you join us next month for the Vermont Wild Kitchen. We hope you all have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Shannon, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right.